Welcome to Session Sunday. Hi guys, it's Jack Edwards and today's session is going to be focusing around attacking in wide areas. But before we get into this week's video, make sure to leave us a like and subscribe, and if you missed last week's video, click on the link above. Okay, so moving into the first part of this week's session, we're looking at a passing sequence and a scenario to then attack from wide areas. But before we get into it, let's have a look at how many players we're working with this week and the equipment that we'll be using. So in terms of players, we're going to have 14 players in total this week. It's going to be 13 outfield players plus our goalkeeper. But if you have more or less players, that's fine. We can just adapt the session to obviously how many players that you've got. So in this area now at work with, you can try and make the passing sequence a bit shorter. We might remove fullbacks and have support runs from in here. Might remove less defenders, so it's a bit easier for the attackers. So just if you have more players as well, you can always add in more attackers as well. You can add a striker focal point up there, maybe even a hold midfielder, however you want to do it. In terms of the equipment, same as normal really. So we're using balls, bibs, cones, and then we have poles as well. We have them as we speak about that quite a lot, about the importance of using them for the players to act as, obviously there's a defender in front of them. And then for the setup for this part of the session, we're going with 50 yards of total width and 50 yards of total depth. In terms of the width, it's going to be 30 yards central and then 10 yards either side. In terms of the depth, from the goal line to this pole here where you can see your attack midfielder / striker is starting, is going to be 30 yards. And then from here to the start point, it's going to be 15 with 5 yards further back. So this area here will just be like halfway, so 7 or 8 yards in there. So the ball is going to start where there's 2 green players. We're going to have our back 4, so 2 defenders and our fullbacks. And then in this area here, we've got our fullbacks and our wingers. So you can kind of treat it as if you've got your 2 wingers, your striker in here, and then your 2 midfielders with your hold midfielder in here. Okay, so what we're looking to do is we're going to play out to one of the wider central midfielders to start, who's then going to set the ball into the striker, who sets it centrally for the player to move on to, and then they're going to play to the opposite side. Okay, so then they're going to look to play into the fullback or the winger, depending on who's created the space. So then this player is going to play into here. So what we're looking for now is our support runs. So if the winger receives it inside here, we're looking for the fullback to get on the outside, cause a distraction for the fullback, okay, and we can create an overload. If the winger receives it quite wide, okay, so by the byline, we want the player coming in on the underlap, okay, so they can come in between that fullback and that centre back and maybe bring them out to create space for the striker to then move into. Okay, so then obviously we can look to attack the goal from there. But when we do get the ball in this wide area, it's up to you. You can either have this fullback coming back in and defending as well, which would then mean that the winger can come and attack too, or you can tell these players to stay in there, which would mean we'd have a 4v3. The midfielder who played out, the striker up here, and then the 2 players wide. Okay, so we're attacking from this wide area. So we might be looking to keep the ball in the wide area and then get a cross into finish or a cutback, or travel inside the pitch. Okay, so we're creating space out wide, and then we're looking at our support runs from these players in here. Okay, so can our striker move out to create space and maybe entice a defender to go out so that we can play in to our midfielder who's made a run behind the defence as well on the shoulder to then get him behind and then look to finish. So obviously we're looking at different scenarios, but we're always going to be starting the ball in wide areas. Okay, so we're going to stretch the defence. Okay, so if you do have the 4 in, you can obviously have width out here as well. So when that ball does get played into this wide area, okay, let's say the player receives it out wide and the fullback goes in, we could then play into the striker who sets into the fullback in behind, which means that the defenders are getting pushed across the pitch. We give this fullback something to think about by creeping in the back post, which then means that the striker and the midfielder, okay, can go 1v1 against these defenders in here, which gives them more chance to receive and finish. One thing that we always speak about in terms of our runs into the box, okay, is whether we're a striker, midfielder or winger, is making sure once we're in the box that we can see the back of the defender's shirt, because it gives us the options, okay, to go front post, to go back post, and to also get a run on them, because we're basically playing on the blind side, which then means that the defender has got to try and position themselves to see both the ball and the man, okay? And if they turn too much to us, that means we can get a run in the front post. If they close the body off and face the ball, that means they obviously can't see what's behind them. So for us, it's making sure we can see the number or the name on the back of the shirt, or if we're just using bibs, just being able to see the back of the defender's shirt. So once we get that ball in the wide area, we're looking to attack with some intent, okay? Get the ball into this final third and then look to score. And then what will happen then is the wide player becomes the striker. So the wide midfielder becomes the striker. Striker goes to the back of the queue. The player who started takes the midfielder's position, and then the winger and fullback go back to the start. Defence gets set back up, and then we'll go the opposite side. So it'll go out here, 1, 2, played out to the side, and then we go and attack. We will now move into our first animation before moving on to part 2 of this week's session. Now moving into part 2 of this week's session, we're now moving into a small-sided game which is focusing on moving the ball out wide to create opportunities to move forward, okay? So in terms of the setup for this part of the session, okay, we're going to get 60 yards of total width, okay? So obviously if you don't have as much room, that's fine. And then we're going to have 50 yards of total depth. So what we're going to have is 20 yards centrally, a width in here, okay? And then 20 yards either side, split into 2 10-yard zones. This is so we can have that space in wide areas to attack down the flanks, okay? And create space for the fullbacks and the wingers to move into. So in terms of the Blues who are going to be defending, they're looking to win the ball back and then scoring these small-sided goals. So another setup that you could do is having a 6v6 with maybe a floater. Okay, so then if the Blues score and played into here, the teams could then transition if you wanted to instead, so that obviously teams can switch over. But obviously if you want to work with the same team going forward, this could be your back four, your midfielders, and then this could be your attackers. Obviously you want them to work on that aspect of the game. So for the Greens, they're looking to use the overload, okay, to get the ball into wide areas and then go and attack, okay? So anyone's free to move everywhere, okay, but what we're trying to use these areas is, so we're looking at the half space here and we're looking in our wide areas out here. So the coach will play in to the Greens who look to get the ball wide. Once they get it in here, it's how can we attack? Where can our support runs be? So our winger might take the move into space out wide, which then gives the fullback 2 things to focus on. This player's run and the player travelling with the ball. Okay, so if they get caught in 2 minds, they might travel towards the ball, which means we've got an easy ball out wide, or they might drop off, which then gives this player space to move into inside the pitch, okay, and assess their options. Then, where can we get support runs? Because obviously we've got this far side as well. The winger might come into central areas, come and play, and our fullback stays wide. But obviously, if we're out here and we lost possession, and the ball goes in here, it's an easy access to goal. So we're thinking of, can we come inside into this lane here, the half space, and if we did lose possession, got a chance of blocking the pass and restricting the opposition space. But also, when the ball moves into central areas, then we can look to go wider. So as the ball moves across the pitch, can we obviously look to support our players, but at the same time think about our out possession shape as well. Where can we be if we do lose the ball? So again, if the ball comes into these areas here, our winger might be central, so they can easily come back into here. The ball gets switched again. Can we look to get the ball into space? So we've got maybe more opportunities to cross and finish with this drill, but also we've got those opportunities to drive into space, which then means that the defence might go back towards goal, leaving space here to cut back, and then what we can do, be quite intricate to play passes in and look to score. Also, if they do look to try and press the ball, okay, because of the width that we've got, okay, we've more chance of playing around the opposition, okay? So obviously if we've got the Greens in here, we keep moving that ball, keep moving it wide, and then if the fullback comes out, centre-backs, holding midfielders come in, the fullbacks come across, okay, we've got all this space this side, so we can then, let's say player pushes up, winger moves out, striker's there, we can then transfer that ball quickly, okay, we've got space to travel into, we get our support runs, which gives the fullback something to think about, so we might drive into space, the fullback makes a run and overlap, which entices this player out, then we can get our runs from strikers in midfield to move in and then finish, okay, so we try and utilise that space in wide areas to create attacking opportunities to score, whether it be a cross and finish, whether it be individual play to drive into space, drive at the back four to score, but it's also having that patience as well to recycle possession, switch the play, okay, so stretching the pitch with our attacking principles, our height, width and depth to then create the opportunities to score. We will now move into our next animation before moving on to the final part of this week's session. Okay, now moving into the final part of this week's session, we're now moving into a game which is focusing on a 3v2 attack in the final third. So what we're looking on doing is penetrating passes into wide areas to then attack basically the two centre-backs with our front three. So in terms of the setup, we're going to have 40 yards of total depth. So in this final third here, it'll be 10 yards either side with 20 yards centrally. And then we'll have obviously 40 yards in here. In terms of our depth, okay, we're going to have 55 yards of total depth. So it's 25 yards in here for the final third, 25 yards for this area in here, and then 5 yards for the end zone, which is what the Blues are looking to dribble into, okay. So the coach will play into the greens, okay. The greens are looking to manoeuvre the ball, okay, to create some space to then play into the wide areas, okay. So they have to play into a wide area. Why? Because we're looking, obviously, that's where we're trying to penetrate from. That's why we're trying to focus our session on today. So when we get the ball in these wide areas, okay, we've got that space to drive into now. So that means that the centre-back's going to be forced into a decision. Did they close the ball or did they drop off? If they drop off, it means the winger can attack the space. We can get our support runs from our striker and our other winger, okay, to create space and score. If we played centrally, okay, obviously we can do that in matches and in other sessions because we can then obviously bring the wingers in. But we're looking to play those passes where it's penetrating into wide areas. So we've played in between the lines. Okay, we've played in between the fullback and the centre backs. We played through the midfield. Okay, so it's those passes where it's receiving on the back foot to then play through. Okay, with intent. Or it's receiving passes, balls, obviously, into these full-back areas to then play forward. So it's different types of options to play into these wide areas because obviously to play through the opposition, we've got to go round them as well. Okay, so we can play into those wide areas. We can attack this space in between the centre-back, obviously where the full-back would be. If you do have more players, we can even put full-backs in as well, and you can have a support run from midfielders, or it can be whatever side, maybe the winger receives the ball, that's the full-back that's in play. This player doesn't come in, and it becomes a 3v3. However you want to do it, but obviously the more advanced the players are, the more advanced you can make the session as well. So the Greens are looking to play in, create that space. The Blues are obviously trying to stay compact in here, but also they're trying to win the ball to obviously dribble it in here. They've got to dribble the ball into here, okay? Why? Because if they try and dribble it, that means there's more chance of transition. So then if we win the ball, we can look to play quickly into these areas and then go and attack. It doesn't even have to be a pass in here. It can be that run takes the defender out. All it takes is a half a yard to shift the ball and then look to score. If the team scores, they'll receive the ball again. If they miss or the keeper saves it, it's a transition. So then obviously the Blues look to get the ball, work it in here, and then to look to drive into the end zone to score. So for the Greens, it's that reaction. Okay, so then when they win the ball back, on transition, secure that ball, bang, there's your outlet to play forward, play into the striker, okay, where can our support runs be? He receives the ball. So this is what we're talking about now. We're not just staying in straight lines, okay? Can we make those runs across the defender, entice people out, and then look to score? Okay, so if we stay too static, and we just run straight lines like this, okay, it becomes too easy. But at the same time, sometimes in these areas, if the players move on the outside, then it gives this player inside here the opportunity to move forward because the defenders have got to think about what this is. So obviously at the start, it can be maybe one player takes the defenders across, okay? And then what can the other movement be? If both players stay wide, then it's going to have to be the striker looks to play them in if the defenders don't get it out there, and then can they find a run to get in behind to look to score. We will now move into our final animation before concluding this week's session. Thanks for watching this week's video. Don't forget to head over to our website where you can sign up to view all of our exclusive content. And we'll see you next week for another Session Sunday.